Welcome to this edition of the weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger, China. I'm Frank Gaffney. I'm proud to be its vice chairman and to present to you a very important, I think quite topical and hopefully consequential program addressing one aspect of a very large and indeed very ominous aspect of the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against our country. And that is its penetration of our homeland in myriad ways. We have done, in the course of the 200 and I think almost 20 of these webinars, programs on various aspects of course, the unrestricted warfare campaign the Chinese have mounted for decades against our country, but various aspects of this particular problem as well, namely the presence of Chinese Communist Party dominated Chinese nationals inside the United States of America. And what they are capable of doing in their various roles in this country, whether it's as students, whether it's as businessmen, as researchers, as bioengineers in our national laboratories, or as tenants or owners, I should say, of property across our country. A fair amount of which appears to be within, and I mean this quite literally, striking distance of sensitive facilities and assets of our military, our intelligence services, critical communications nodes, and certainly other infrastructure. We, in short, have enemy within our wire, and this is made the more dangerous because that enemy makes no secret of its intention to destroy this country. We're going to focus on one specific facility in which this purchase of land by personnel associated with the Chinese Communist Party, sometimes its United Front Work Department, the vehicle for its influence operations, and its subversion. The case study we're going to present involves an extraordinarily important installation in Louisiana, Barksdale Air Force Base, the home of the Air Force Global Strike Command, which has the operational responsibility for not one but two legs of our critically important nuclear triad: the intercontinental range ballistic missiles managed by the Air Force, and the strategic bomber force of the United States, also managed by the United States Air Force. There are, as we will learn, reasons to be concerned about both the operational and information security of that facility, but also its physical security, by virtue of the fact that in close proximity are these assets of the Chinese Communist Party. To talk about those assets, to talk about their ownership, to talk about their status, to talk about what is apparently the plan to use such facilities in furtherance of, at the very minimum, the Chinese Communist Party's influence operations, but perhaps a great deal more and far worse for the homeland and national security of the United States of America. To kick off our conversation, I'm very pleased to have with us in person the founder of Data Abyss, the Director of Research Intelligence at Parallax Advanced Research, an Air Force veteran himself, as well as a former senior lead technologist at Booz Allen Hamilton and former project leader and lead data scientist at MITRE, two very important defense contracting firms. His name is L.J. Eads. I've only just met him, but I'm very appreciative of his service to our country, and in particular, the service he's about to render in setting the predicate for the conversation we will be having in the course of this webinar. LJ, thank you very much for joining us, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for having me. So this isn't a new problem. What I mean by that is we've seen United Front Work Department affiliations and influence operations through research institutions, universities, state governments, defense laboratories here in the United States, Department of Energy. We've seen this story kind of time and time again. This one is a bit more interesting to me, previously serving in the Air Force locally near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, because of the involvement of golf courses. A lot of people might, unless you served potentially in the military or served next to a military installation, golf courses might just seem like a golf course, where your spouse or your friends get together on the weekends and play golf and kind of mingle and play the game. But on military installations and near military installations, golf courses are where morale events occur, promotions occur, forced fun. I'm not a golf person myself, but time and time again, I was voluntold to go play golf for fun with our units and our commander. So golf courses are centric to military installation morale and events, as well as retirees. Usually the surrounding golf courses or on-base golf courses have tons of programs and low cost to play benefits. So I wanted to set that predicate of this isn't just your normal golf course. This is a golf course next to a nuclear military base. I wanted to set that stage. Also in 2024, Barksdale had its own golf course, but it was closed for financial reasons and various other reasons. So this golf course, owned and operated by somebody affiliated with the United Front Work Department, took that place of Barksdale's golf course. Usually most Air Force bases have their own golf course or rely on a community golf course. But in this case, the next best thing was a United Front Work Department affiliated golf course. Additionally, this involves two golf courses in the surrounding area that share lots of fence line with the light line and installation itself. So that brings additional concern, which obviously golf courses are massive, share tons of green space, property. So these are massive facilities. Additionally, a part of this problem that I have a love-hate relationship with is we're familiar with this problem, but military installations are, I think, increasingly at risk because military installations don't have a mission to investigate their neighbors, understand who their neighbors are, understand the businesses surrounding the military installations. That's not their mission. Their mission is on base, not off base. So this is more of a policing matter, which the police, off base aren't well equipped for, foreign influence operations. So that's another part of this problem, is that our Department of War isn't charged with foreign influence operations on off base that affect on base operations. So this problem exists not just to military installations. It affects our university systems, research institutions, defense laboratories, national laboratories. It's a similar problem. So I think that's where we should look for help. Policy help, political help is creating potentially solutions to off-base foreign influence control. Additionally, another associated problem This individual, Eugene, that acquired these golf courses that's affiliated with the United Front Work Department, he meets all of the criteria to meet the FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act requirements. But that FARA is managed, implemented by the Department of Justice. It's there's very minimal or slim to no Chinese, United Front Work Department institutions within FARA, but very little CCP individuals or institutions regulated by FARA. Because we're used to in the United States this game of, are you a spy or are you not a spy, to meet that FARA requirement. This individual, like Eugene, he's playing both sides of the fence. He's playing, a political hat, a businessman hat, and supporting the CCP through, political influence. He's not traditionally your common spy that we're used to in the United States. The United Front Work Department doesn't operate that way. They don't operate through the means of pure espionage. They operate through the means of influence and control, creating friends, relationships, financial influence. And that's traditionally not what FARA has been for. It's been more, for obviously espionage and counter-espionage issues. So again, this individual would have traditionally, in my view, in my eyes, meet all the requirements for FARA to register under FARA. But again, in the United States, we don't have anybody out there or even, investigating these sorts of issues to add or require individuals to register under FARA. So that's why this didn't happen. This is an individual that's been in Louisiana for nearly 40 years. He's a overseas committee member operating here in the United States for the United Front Work Department. And freely he's meeting with politicians, professors, base personnel from Barksdale, and creating relationships. Even so much so, he's quoted that the golf courses, traditionally you would think of somebody opening up a golf course, loves golf potentially, likes to play golf, is about the game of golf. This is a United Front Work Department individual that's quoted saying he opened these golf courses for Chinese to American people relationships, people to people influence. He specifically wanted to own these golf courses to create business relationships with politicians, with base personnel, with people in academia that could be influenced. He's openly saying that. So he is he has multiple hats on here. But again, he's not meeting the criteria for pure espionage. So obviously I'm trying to set the predicate here that we have multiple issues at stake here. But and this is just a scenario that we're speaking about today at Barksdale Air Force Base. I think this is a greater issue across the United States at large and our military installations. Frank, before this call, we were speaking about some of my experiences in the Air Force. Is that when you first move to a military installation, a new military installation, you're usually trained on, you're given a blacklist traditionally of places not to go, no-go facilities. And those places usually include like bars and clubs, places where there's criminal behavior, gang crime. I've never been to a Air Force facility that I've been trained up on, CCP or United Front Work Department prevalence around the military installation, because we don't do that. We're not trained up on doing that. We're usually telling our warfighters how they're at risk to domestic issues like gang violence and drugs and things of that nature. So again, I think we have a lot to learn from this Barksdale example. It's one of many, and more to come. More stories like this will come forward, and it's a real problem, especially affecting our military installations. That, as you mentioned in the beginning of the call, at any point the CCP could ask Eugene, if they haven't already, how they could pre-position, say, air-to-air missile systems, electronic warfare systems, cyber systems for cyber intrusion into Barksdale's SATCOM networks, because he has the property, he has the facilities, he has the accesses potentially, he knows the people. And I think this is a big problem.
This is very troubling in many dimensions, and we'll get into as many of them as we can. But thank you for setting the stage for this. And I did also want to commend, especially to our audience, some extraordinary reporting that has been done. I take it with the benefit of your insights and counsel by Philip Lenziski, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is, I believe, a staff writer for the Daily Caller News Foundation. And this piece that he wrote, exclusive CCP intel official owns golf clubs flanking U.S. nuclear missile nerve center. The headline sort of captures the full magnitude of the problem. And we'll tease out some of the things that you've raised as specific issues, LJ, in just a moment. But before we do, I want to bring in some of our other contributors, all of whom were unable to join us in person, but were kind enough to give us comments and interviews, mostly for our program Securing America at Real America's Voice. Some of them are short because we wound up touching on this with other topics, but I think all of them are important in their insightful commentary about either the Barksdale problem specifically or the larger problem of what is happening in our country at the hands of Chinese investors working for, clearly, our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to go first to Congressman Keith Self. He is an Army veteran, a Ranger, a former Collin County, Texas county judge, and now a member of the House of Representatives representing Collin County and adjoining areas in the United States House of Representatives. He's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the chairman of its Europe subcommittee. I had a chance to visit with him on our program, and he was kind enough to allow me to excerpt part of that interview for this purpose. I think you'll find it bracing. Let's go to the video with Congressman Self, please.
You're talking about Barksdale, which houses the B-1 bombers, amongst other things, but one of our main strategic assets. And look, the United States is the only nation in the world that has the power projection capability that Barksdale Air Force Base represents. Now, the B-2s are up in Missouri, but the B-1s are at Barksdale, amongst other things. So this is what makes this base so important. So if you can get surveillance on Barksdale, if you can follow the comings and goings of the B-1s, the maintenance issues, if you have surveillance on Barksdale, that's a great deal of intelligence for the Communist Chinese Party. Now, they own these two golf courses, so they are in very close proximity to be able to monitor Barksdale. That's very concerning because, look, we are currently at war with the Chinese Communist Party because it's a hybrid war today. It's not a shooting war, but they have every intention of being a superpower within the next few decades. Barksdale represents part of our power projection around the world, so they want to have surveillance on it so that they can know what we are doing. Now, you mentioned that it's a part of a larger plant. Absolutely. We really have very little idea how much the Chinese are embedded in America. We've heard about these police stations that they have that control Chinese immigrants, citizens, and nationals here. We've heard about the 18,000 perhaps Chinese terrorists that have come across the border that we don't know where they are. In fact, it's more than that, Chinese military-aged men. So we need to be very aware that the Chinese want to infiltrate, want to surveil not only Barksdale, but other areas. You may remember the weather balloon that passed over the United States. The Biden administration allowed it to pass over the United States, over some of our most sensitive military bases, before they shot it down after it had exited the United States. So this is a real problem, and it goes much further than Barksdale. Barksdale is a great example of the issue, though.
Let me ask you, though, sir. You have served, as I mentioned, as a special operator. You know a thing or two about surveillance, for sure, but you also know about the kinetic part of warfare. We had a pretty important wake-up call, I think, when Ukraine sent drones against the Russian equivalents, maybe, of our B-1 bombers. In that case, they were nuclear-capable bombers, and they destroyed the flight line. Could those golf courses at Barksdale Air Force Base be used for that purpose as well, sir? And should that be of at least as much concern as, intelligence gathering that could be done on those installations as well?
Well, it is a concern, but certainly we're still protected by the coast, the oceans, because Ukraine obviously has a border with Russia in the same continent. But what they did was they built trucks that had these drones on them, and so they simply drove the trucks into the vicinity of the base that they destroyed, the flight line that they destroyed. So is that possible? Could someone build the drones, camouflage them some way in trucks or other delivery vehicle to get close? Yeah, if you could get them to those golf courses, they're well within range of a couple of miles of the base. So yes, that's a possibility. If you could build the drones, arm the drones, and get them close enough. So yeah, that is a possibility.
Well, I don't want to go to the worst case scenario here, but as you know, I'm sure very well, arguably one of the most sensitive areas of America, the sort of areas in the environs of Newport News, or bases in Hampton Roads and so on, and other facilities, were overflown for 17 nights by somebody's drones. And our colleague Sam Faddis has said that some of them seem to have been operated by the Chinese. So they got a lot of drones in this country, that's for sure. We've been buying them up like crazy. But should we not be concerned that whether it's, as close as those golf courses are, or perhaps even farmland, maybe in Texas, in proximity, but more distant proximity, could also be used as launch pads for these kinds of weapons against sensitive facilities? And by the way, it's not just the bombers, of course. The global, power projection command there at Barksdale would also be a pretty good target, I would imagine, for the Chinese.
Yeah, absolutely. Command and control. That's one of the big advantages we have over the Chinese. We have developed our joint force command and control, strategic command and control, over the last 40 years. And they are struggling to even have a joint operation, commanded and controlled adequately. So yes, they've got a lot of ships, but that's one of our advantages, is the global command and control. You saw it in Venezuela, the very detailed, very precise, very complex operation we ran into Venezuela. Well, yes, we accomplished the mission, but everyone around the world stood up and took notice of our ability to conduct a precise global operation, as wonderfully done as you can imagine. I mean, no one else has that capability. Now, the farmland in Texas, yes, we know that the CCP bought up some farmland near an air base in the south of Texas. We know that they're buying up land near other facilities across the nation. That's what makes this so concerning, Frank, is there is a pattern. It's not just Barksdale. It's not just the weather balloon. It's where they're buying up farmland because it's a very strategic move on the CCP because, again, I say, they want to have visibility of our operations.
Let me just say that what the congressman laid out in his remarks could not be of more importance as we contemplate what is going on here. He said it starkly. We are at war with China. Now, as he said, it's a hybrid war thus far, not kinetic, but I believe our Committee on the Present Danger China believes strongly it is a pre-kinetic war using unrestricted warfare techniques of mostly a non-kinetic sort, though a biological warfare attack and the ongoing chemical warfare of fentanyl and now netazines all suggests a willingness to kill Americans for sure. But the point is whether we're paying attention to that war, whether we understand that we are actually in one now, let alone that we are failing to take the sorts of steps that are required to protect ourselves against it, is very much central to our purpose today, to raise the alarm, to make clear the stakes, and to call for urgent corrective measures, specifically with respect to installations like Barksdale Air Force Base. We're going to hear next from another distinguished veteran. His name is Colonel Grant Newsham, United States Marine Corps, retired. Colonel Newsham is a frequent contributor to these programs, a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, a man who not only served with distinction in uniform, but also as a Foreign Service officer in our embassy in Tokyo. He's been a businessman in the Far East for many years and is the author of a best-selling book, When China Attacks, a Warning to America. He spoke with me on one of our programs of Securing America recently, and we have excerpted a segment, a brief segment, but an illuminating one for your benefit now. Let's go to it.
Well, this is just the latest example of Chinese, basically government frontmen, buying properties near strategic American sites. This is just the latest. This is nothing new. And it's not a coincidence that this rich Chinese guy just happens to show up at, rural Louisiana to buy a couple of golf courses. That's no accident. And what you do is once the Chinese have this territory, you can use it for all sorts of things, from signals intelligence gathering, which is immensely valuable. It's often overlooked because most people don't understand it. You can use it as an offensive platform. Say, use armed drones to simply go down the flight line at Barksdale and destroy every plane in it. That's how bad this is. He should not have been allowed to buy this. He's is a member, a part of this United Front Works Department, which is the Chinese Communist Party's really subversion organization for countries they target, which is every country. And they have been active in the United States, very active and very successful as well. They've had no trouble buying off American elites, but not just at the very top on Capitol Hill or on Wall Street, but down to local government levels. And it's all done under a very friendly guise of just trying to build relations and, a Chinese guy just doing some business. But it is all a deliberate attempt to put the Chinese in a position to destroy us and make it so we lose when the next war comes, if we're even able to respond. Well, when you can get your target country, the people in it, to do your work for you, that's just the best of all possible worlds. And it's what the Chinese do. They literally buy off huge chunks of America's ruling class, from Wall Street to the business community and on Capitol Hill. There's just too many people who have taken and are taking Chinese money. The Chinese have been immensely successful at that. You wonder why nothing has been done about fentanyl that's killed 750,000 Americans since about 2012. Well, the Chinese have bought off too much of America's elite class. And it's not just at the top, it's down at the local levels. And that's why you have battery factories, trying to put them in Michigan. And they have had some success in some places, and why you have Chinese men who are associated with the Chinese Communist Party buying up land next to America's most strategic sites, and not much has been done about it.
Not much has been done about it. It seems to me to be an understatement of rather epic proportions. And that's why we are gathered for the purpose, is to see if we can't help catalyze both what has been done, which is the effort on behalf of some states to restrict Chinese purchases of farmland, but to raise the visibility of the dire straits in which we find ourselves, woefully unprepared in terms of the security of our homeland. And we will pursue this point or several further presentations. I believe we have a video from an interview that I did with George Racely, a man who has been involved in political life in our country for decades, a veteran of some 300 political campaigns, and service on Capitol Hill in senior positions in the House of Representatives and in the office of the Vice President of the United States. He's these days the editor of a marvelous online resource, Conservative HQ. You can find it at conservativehq.org. It's Richard Viguery's newsletter. And I want you to see some brief remarks from my interview with George Racely the other day.
This is a pattern that's been repeated all over the country. And it's worth noting that the communist Chinese, or I prefer to call them the Red Chinese because they are a revolutionary state,
Yes.
knows much more about us than we know about them. And for example, Barksdale is one of the places where the presidential aircraft flew on 9/11.
Right.
And this pattern is seen throughout the country on a very strategic level by the Chinese. In Florida, they have attempted to surround our Space Force Command and the Kennedy Space Center with similar holdings of property. And the state passed a law prohibiting that. Now, that's working its way through the courts. So far, it's been successful in the state legislation. This is a great example of how our enemies are experts at using our system against us. So one would think that there would be some kind of advanced pre-purchase review of these kind of property transactions, but in
the
fact
so-called
there
CFIUS
isn't.
process, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, is.
They should be focused on these kind of things, but their focus tends to be on technology and manufacturing, stuff like that. And so the obvious idea of a Chinese intelligence operator owning huge swathes of property around Barksdale Air Force Base somehow doesn't get up the food chain to a prior restraint type of situation. Yeah. And so that's why it ends up in the courts.
Thank you, George Racely. That's why it ends up in the courts. And it's kind of as though we think that this is a matter of just jurisprudence and not vital national security. We couldn't be more wrong. And the danger that is associated with being so wrong is hard to overstate. Let me turn to our guest who is with us in person and just explore a couple of things that you said, LJ, that I want to make sure we've really understood properly. Your point about the golf course, I think is the way you put it, not being a normal golf course. It's not just one golf course, of course, as you know. It is two golf courses, and they essentially, to use a military term, envelop the facility of Barksdale Air Force Base, meaning that there is little that goes on there that is not going to be discernible from close quarters, such as those golf courses provide, if there is indeed uh, electronic intelligence signals collection capabilities, for example, or simple line of sight photographic observation, perhaps from certain places. Surveillance, in short, is something that, at a bare minimum, can be done surreptitiously and potentially quite comprehensively, can it not?
As you can imagine, Barksdale has satellite networks, SATCOM networks for its bomber fleet. Being in range or near those locations would be an immediate concern. There's a lot of these networks leverage communications approaches called VSAT, very small aperture networks. And basically what a VSAT is a very small, narrow beam. So any receivers, senders or receivers on those networks need to be in the beam. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, know this, and they know that having somebody near or entities near infrastructure near these military installations are needed for, SIGINT collection purposes, communications purposes. And in a near wartime scenario, I was thinking about a lot of the other speakers were saying. Think about the deterrent factor that the CCP gains just by us having this conversation. It's not a pleasing conversation. So just the fact that we're having this conversation, that our installations are at risk, is a deterrent factor by itself. Meaning that if we were in a near wartime scenario with the Chinese military, the PLA, we're at risk by just the deterrent that maybe potentially the CCP has collection capabilities or capabilities like munitions in or near our military installations. That factor, I think, is massive. I haven't seen a case where the Chinese military, the PLA, is concerned that their military installations in China are concerned with U.S. relevance around its installations. That's not something that you necessarily hear about, or I think that the Chinese military are largely concerned about because of how they, secure their military installations and just the control over having businesses in China, to put it simply. And I think those are major factors to consider. The other thing I wanted to note that all the other speakers hit on one topic specifically was this isn't a new story. This is a new story, but it's the same approach that the CCP has been taking for a long, long time. I think my question is why is it so hard to fix? Why hasn't it been solved? I don't think necessarily it's like rocket science to fix this problem, but I think there's probably ties in back to the United Front Work Department and influence to make sure that it's not fixed, potentially being another risk factor and deterrent factor.
Well, that brings me to a favorite topic of mine. As you may know, LJ, we published on the basis of, I think, the first 70 or so of the webinars of this series, about 2 years ago now, this book entitled The Indictment, prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and friends for crimes against America, China, and the world. And it's those friends, I think, often recruited by or suborned by or otherwise induced by the United Front Work Department or the intelligence services of China or who knows, party apparatchiks of other stripes to serve the interest of communist China. And there are people who fit that description. The Chinese call them captured elites, as you know, in basically every walk of life, from academia and the media to business, most especially Wall Street. We see signs of it in various government entities as well, including, of course, elected politicians. The cumulative effect of their involvement, not wanting to offend China or wanting to please China, when I say China, I mean the Chinese Communist Party, of course. They are, in fact, enablers of the defeat mechanism that the Chinese are trying to put into play. And you put the question very properly. Does all of that have something to do with, well, in the first instance, why we're selling land to the Chinese, let alone land that is within drone striking distance, or make perhaps missile distance for sure, of interesting targets in our homeland. But also the question specifically, why haven't we done anything to fix this problem? And again, in some states, we have seen legislation that's trying to fix it, at least in those states, but not at a national level and not as aggressively as certainly the moment requires. Let me ask you about a question that I think is probably on the minds of a lot of folks listening to this. There's probably a certain degree of incredulity that there isn't some kind of mechanism that evaluates these sorts of foreign investment transactions. And in fact, as you know, LJ, there is. It's called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. What can you tell us about the role that it's playing, if any, in reviewing these transactions from a national security perspective?
CFIUS is small, and CFIUS is, again, charged with foreign acquisitions of national security importance, or that pose national security risks. But CFIUS is very small in personnel. CFIUS is looking at massive acquisitions, large acquisitions of semiconductor companies, potentially bearing companies that affect our fighter bomber fleets, companies of developing certain alloys. But these are large acquisitions. These aren't onesie, twosie $1 million golf courses. These are large acquisitions of potentially multi-billion-dollar deals, deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with parent-child relationships globally, subsidiaries involved. Then again, affect our hard material defense equipment. So our fighters and bombers, obviously, our missiles, our artillery, weapons manufacturing, fuels or oils or semiconductors and microelectronics, things of that nature. So CFIUS necessarily doesn't, they may be charged with this sort of deal, and I think this would be something that would interest them, but I don't see today that they have the bandwidth. They have the appetite, but the requirement. They're not looking at domestic, small, local community transactions by foreign adversaries. I think there's a lot of people in CFIUS. There's a China mission-focused group within CFIUS that would be interested in this, that has this mission again. It's just they're spread too thin. Where, back to elite capture, China's acquiring many, many companies globally and U.S. companies. So CFIUS is overwhelmed by the acquisitions that they're currently dealing with. And I just don't believe that golf courses are on their menu right now.
No, I'm sure of it, among other things, because there's the golf course in question, too. I've obviously gotten through them. But I just have to say, I've sort of set you up because I have a strong and long-running beef with CFIUS. I think the excuse that it's too small is something that's, no excuse at all. It can be easily fixed by simply adding personnel. The bigger problem, it seems to me, LJ, is that the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States is the Secretary of the Treasury. It's staffed by the Treasury. And I have no beef with Scott Bessent personally, but institutionally, the U.S. Treasury basically never saw a foreign investment that they didn't like. It's their mission, is to bring foreign investment to the United States. Now, I think in fairness, the president has laid out an America First investment policy, as you may know, back in February. It ostensibly was meant to address both inbound investment of the kind we're talking about here. Chinese land purchases, as I recall, are specifically mentioned as something we want to discourage, if not utterly block. But also outbound investments, don't invest in, for example, Chinese companies providing weapon systems to the People's Liberation Army designed to kill us. Unfortunately, this AFIP, as it's known, American First Investment Policy, has largely not been enforced, as best I can tell. So this is not a corrective to the CFIUS problem either. But it does seem to me that we have to get our hands around this, because whether it's a small golf course or whether it's a large one or whether it's, a bigger enterprise, the national security imperatives here are clearly such that they need to be addressed in a much more direct and effective way. Let me ask you about FARA. You mentioned this, the the Foreign Agent Registration Act should indeed have a guy like this fellow Eugene Xi registered. What are the practical implications of the fact that he hasn't been registered? Does that give rise to a basis upon which he could be prosecuted, expelled from the country? What sort of penalties are associated with the failure to register?
The current Chinese entities on the FARA are media outlets, China Daily being an example. Huawei subsidiaries like Futureway are on the FARA. So these are largely companies that are on FARA that are using by the CCP their influence and influencing their political agenda in the United States. So that could be through, again, media exchanges, that could be through Futureway acquisitions, or they're lobbying for protecting themselves in the United States. So they're lobbying to protect Huawei in the United States. So there's a couple entities on FARA. I'll leave it at that, just a handful. Maybe a handful of individuals as well associated with the CCP. But these are largely very significant CCP officials, not somebody like Eugene that's, I would say, lower, potentially lower on the totem pole in terms of the ladder of the CCP. But in my eyes, he meets all of the criteria related to just the same examples of how CCP media outlets and Futureway made the FARA, were required to register with FARA. He meets those same requirements. It's just that the Department of Justice isn't charged with or investigating largely United Front Work Department individuals or institutions of the United Front Work Department operating in the United States. There are some associations on FARA, but again, it's maybe one or two that are part of the United Front Work Department. Again, I think it goes back to the issue that DOJ is looking at a checkbox solution. Is this entity supporting foreign influence and espionage, yes or no? For somebody like Eugene and others, the United States supporting the United Front Work Department, that's a gray area. And the DOJ has a lot of trouble understanding that, because we're in this world right now where in U.S. policy, we need to clearly understand the United Front Work Department, and creating clear definitions of what the United Front Work Department is and the institutions that make it is a gray area by itself. It's very, very challenging.
This is some place where a great deal more clarity is obviously in order. If, as Congressman Self has said, we are at war, and that war is taking the form of hybrid action against us, a preeminent element, including, as we discussed, the capture of our elites, is a very central front in that war, and it has to be addressed as such if we're to be, well, serious about all this, for one thing, but also to survive the assault that's now underway against us. We have a clip also from an interview I conducted earlier today with Charles Sam Faddis, a man who served his country both in the uniform of the United States Army and without a uniform as an undercover operative of the Central Intelligence Agency for some 20 years. He is deeply knowledgeable about the threat environment in which we find ourselves. Like our other presenters, most of them, he is a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, and the driving force behind a very, very important online resource and magazine. You can find it at andmagazine.substack.com, and I strongly encourage you to do so. Let's go to the videotape with Sam Faddis, please.
Barksdale is a particularly egregious example of what's going on all across the United States. That the Chinese or folks affiliated with the Chinese, the United Front, have been allowed to purchase land in proximity to bases. Look, I mean, I have worked obviously undercover abroad for many years. We did all kinds of surreptitious things in proximity to the military bases of our adversaries with a hell of a lot less freedom of maneuver, one might say, than this, in placing sensors and other devices literally almost right up against the gates of nuclear storage facilities and so forth. Obviously, I'm not free to get into the details of that. But you give people time and a little bit of leeway, and they can do all kinds of things. Now, imagine you got a guy who owns this property, and he's running a commercial business, which means people are all over the property, and trucks are in and out of the property, and buildings are constructed, and nobody is scrutinizing it. He's not going through a gate and being subjected to a security check. He has literally complete freedom of maneuver over presumably years. So might he begin by being able to emplace devices that will suck up all of the data and provide all the intelligence? For instance, simple example. You got an alert roster for a bomber squadron. Those alerts go out over cell phones. This guy's sitting there in proximity to the base. Not only does he have direct eyes on, but he is aware of when those alerts have been issued and everybody's been called in, of immense strategic advantage. But that's the passive element of it, right? He also has the capacity to put in place devices, even if we don't go to explosives, which I'm not saying we can't, electronic jamming devices and things to screw up navigation and communication and to prevent the alert roster from working in the first place. I mean, you know, this is we end up back at this point, in my estimation, so often. The first solution to this is you have to take away the opportunity. The idea you can just monitor all this and know what's happening it doesn't work that way. You can't give the enemy this kind of freedom of maneuver and then think you are on top of what they're doing. You can't maintain the posture we maintain and seriously contend that we are defending against these threats. Bottom line. If you have given them this access, this freedom of maneuver in this much time, then you should be prepared for the fact that you are done before you even know that the game has started, if that makes sense. So first of all, the scope of their collection, their theft, is so enormous that it gets absurd at a certain point to think we still have secrets. Because each one of those 300,000 guys and gals does not have to steal the crown jewels. He has to steal a piece, and collectively they will complete the puzzle. So you have that, you're working from that platform, and then you have given them access to everything. I mean, you know, as a baseline here, we know it has been established publicly that they are in a position to take down our critical infrastructure, to shut off your phone system, your electricity. Not like you got a power outage, folks, and in a few hours the power company's going to have it back on. It's done. And now you've given them access directly to the crown jewels of your military defense structure. So, you know, you will be blind and flattened and incapable of responding. I mean, the Pearl Harbor will happen on our soil without warning. And every plan we have for responding will be pointless because your comms don't work and your planes don't fly and nobody can move and nobody even knows what's going on. It is, you know, the answer to this obviously is we must have a completely fundamentally different attitude. We can't have hundreds of thousands of Chinese students in our labs, and we can't have Chinese folks tied directly to the CCP buying land all around our most sensitive military installation. You just have to start there. Otherwise, you're just saying, okay, whatever. We don't care. We're rolling the dice and letting them do whatever they want.
Sam, let me just ask you, because you mentioned a term that I think is often used in this connection, that that the purchases of land are in close proximity to interesting targets, Barksdale being an example, of course. But with drones, you don't actually have to be all that close.
No, you don't.
To be able to do a lot of damage.
You talk about what was going on down around Newport News in Norfolk. We dug into that when all this was going on in Ann Magazine and very quickly established that at least in some of those cases, there were individuals who had come here from China who were operating drones off of property and clearly spying and running these devices around. So, as you said, that device, that if you're set up to operate that drone to take pictures or collect suck up electrons out of the air, just as easily could deliver a payload. I mean, look at the Ukraine-Russian war. There is absolutely nothing to stop that. Have we strategically made any change in course to prevent that from continuing? Not to my knowledge, no. We're allowing it to exist.
And among other things, apparently those flight lines, still have arrays of B-2 bombers or B-52s or what have you, ships in port, that, as I say, can be overflown and attacked at will by these drones for negligible cost, using the kind of infrastructure we know the Chinese Communist Party has established in this country. Well, Sam said two particularly important things there, I think. One is that this problem is going unaddressed, and we cannot credibly say we are protecting the national security of the United States if this attitude, seeming indifference to these dangers, persists. We're going to take one final run at bringing Captain James Fennell in for a final comment in this very illuminating and deeply distressing, I have to say, panel. Captain Fennell is a retired Navy intelligence officer. In his last duty station, he was the chief of intelligence and information operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. He has been at the very vanguard of those both in uniform and out, warning about what the Chinese Communist Party is up to, the extent to which the People's Liberation Army is massively building its capabilities to attack us, among others. And he is a valued member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, frequent contributor to these presentations, and I guess weekly on Securing America. Let's go to an excerpt of my conversation with him earlier today.
We have an increasing report of PRC access to American land. There's reports out about how much land that they've been buying up around the country. We have a report from the 5th of January about the Chinese buying 2 golf courses, a Chinese businessman who has a long track record of association with the Chinese Communist Party and the United Front Work Department, buying up 2 golf courses around Barksdale Air Force Base, which is the home of the Air Force Global Strike Command, which is essentially the home for 1/3 of our nuclear triad, the airborne portion. So our bomber fleet, the B-2s and B-52s are stationed there, and they're very important to our national security. So having Chinese-owned golf courses within proximity, less than 2 miles north and south of this base, basically surrounding it, if you will, is something of concern. Now, do we find a cache of 100 PLA soldiers there, getting ready to raid Barksdale? No. But if you go back 2 years ago into 2024, even here in Switzerland, the Swiss found that there was a Chinese couple that had bought a house right near the Meiringen Air Base, one of their key air bases in central Switzerland. And when they were asked and started to investigate it, guess what happened? The Chinese bugged out and left the country because they didn't want to answer the questions. We've had reports of Chinese operations around our bases and spying activity around our bases. across the country. There's too many to even talk about. We had a couple of years ago during COVID, we found that there was a biolab near Naval Air Station Lemoore, which is the major master jet base for the U.S. Navy's West Coast aircraft carriers. That's where they all train and live and work. So we have multiple reports of this kind of weird activity. Then we have the reports of Chinese police stations across the country being run by the Chinese agents from China in our country, essentially running their own agency to maintain cognizance and control over Chinese citizens that are in America. And then we have spying cases. Just most recently this week, a U.S. Navy sailor of Chinese heritage was caught, a machinist mate from the USS Essex, providing thousands and thousands of pages of data and classified information to the Chinese government via an interlocutor, an agent, a handler. So a Chinese handler in China that was done over the internet. So we have people, our system, our security system in the military is based a large degree on trust. Now we have counterintelligence, but for the most part, it's based on trust. And we're finding that there's holes in the cheese, so to speak. So it puts our nation at great risk, and it demands a focused attention. And then you add in the 4 years of the Biden administration where the gates were open. And even during the Trump administration, I mean, he was fighting Congress and fighting a federal bureaucracy that didn't want to shut the border down. So we literally had over 10 million people come into this country, and there's most assuredly, we saw videos of Chinese nationals coming in. So we are at risk right now, in my opinion, from some kind of, in the event of hostilities around Taiwan or against Japan or against the Philippines or something even against our own, maybe they want to take out something in Pearl Harbor or whatever. We are at risk in the mainland, in CONUS, continental United States, from potential Chinese action. And the ability to neutralize or disrupt or degrade our ability to respond is not out of the realm of possibility. And we're seeing other nations do this around the world. We need to make sure that we're aware that it's not just going to be potentially just some kind of overt PLA invasion or action inside our lifelines. It could come in the form of other agents or organizations that they're working with. So when I watch and see the violence that's going on in Minnesota right now, this open organized rebellion, it's very clearly an organized effort by anti-American groups to rebel against the government and their policies and the federal government, to create havoc and to create civil war. Who knows what China's involvement with that is? Are they funding it? Are they coordinated with it? And what would they do in the event of a real action that the Xi and the Communist Party would like to take? So we have to be really aware that this kind of lawlessness has ramifications that not just threaten local security in Minneapolis, but threaten our own national security across the nation.
Well, that is as good a summary of the problem and a call to action as I could hope for, and deeply grateful to Captain Fennell for his leadership in all of these areas. And I guess I'm going to come to you with a final question, LJ. This comment that the captain made there towards the end of his remarks, I must tell you that the single most worrying thing to me of all of the concerns that we've illuminated in the course of this conversation, and a great many besides, the 220 or so of these webinars have covered in detail, is the presence in our country of at least tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers. And as Sam Faddis was describing, the freedom of movement that they have, we don't even know where they are, let alone have any official rendering of how many there are in this country. We saw large numbers of unaccompanied military-aged men, many of them seemingly wearing similar outfits or carrying similar kinds of kit, moving, it's been said, in groups But does that constitute one or more divisions of enemy special forces, perhaps, in our country? I don't know, but I think we have a need to know. And we have an imperative need to find out where they are and neutralize them. At a minimum, get them out of the country. So, to you, LJ, if you take all of the things that we've talked about here, the points that you've made about Barksdale in particular, the various other concerns that have been expressed about facilities elsewhere in this country, the numerous options that the Chinese Communist Party has put into place that on command could prompt massive problems for military installations, for movement of forces, for critical infrastructure, for our economy, for our political system, for our nation as a whole. What would your recommendation be at this point that we do? Ideally, if you were to touch on it, this question of those soldiers, but also about problem cases like Barksdale, for example.
So I'll touch on this part quickly that we largely didn't cover, and this was Eugene is a pawn in the story. If you read the Daily Caller's reporting on this, Eugene was a pawn in the way that he was a touch point for other CCP and consulate officials of the CCP and intelligence personnel to come visit and build relationships for. So Eugene received many visits, and just a handful of them are actually reported in the Daily Caller reporting. You probably will hear about more of those visits into the future and what they were about and how Eugene supported these visits. But Eugene's just a pawn. The bigger question is, why are CCP intelligence officials coming to visit Eugene? It's another question. And then a third question is, why are we allowing blatantly obvious CCP intel officials that aren't hiding their positions on the internet? I mean, they have Baidu pages and Wikipedia pages. These are senior intelligence officials of the Chinese Communist Party coming and actively visiting the United States, visiting the consulates, visiting political businessmen, personnel like Eugene that owns golf courses. And then what are they doing here? I've seen time and time again examples like this where there are offices or personal offices within universities that bring in or have visiting United Front Work Department officials that are presented by the consulate for some kind of dinner, and I've seen examples in University of Washington where they had a Beijing night where the consulate brought in CCP and intelligence officials for a Beijing night for cocktails and dinner and to share technology outcomes. Why is this happening? Why is this allowed? And then what are they doing here during that period of time that we don't see a footprint on the internet for? Are they meeting with other intelligence personnel here on the ground in the United States, military age males and personnel here in the United States to have some kind of further agenda? I mean, I imagine that they probably wouldn't be meeting face to face, but they're obviously having some kind of influence and reason for being here and flying all the way across the pond to visit, a Beijing night represented by the consulate of the CCP. So, to answer your question, I think they are up to something. What are they up to? I think they're playing the long game. What could we do about it? I think we should list entities like the United Front Work Department as espionage actors and either not allow them to come into the United States or report who they are and what they're doing in the United States in a controlled manner. Today, like some of your speakers said, they have full reign of access and travel accesses here in the United States, and that's not controlled in any shape or form. And I think we need to control that. Back to your question before, could the DOJ under FARA pursue criminal matters against Eugene? I think so, and I think they should. DOJ has a foreign influence office and foreign influence personnel that pursue criminal matters related to foreign influence. That is what Eugene is doing. He's performing political influence for the United Front Work Department, by the CCP. He could be pursued through a criminal complaint under national security means. And I think we should continue doing that and should pursue that. And I hope we start, getting there.
Thank you, LJ Eads. I would just add that the land that the Chinese Communist Party has acquired across the United States, all of which, at the very least, has the potential of being used to threaten our country. If it's not actually happening, it has certainly the potential, given that it is in the hands of our mortal enemies, the CCP. I'm not going to be dissuaded of that by the argument that some of this land is held by private entities, owners like Eugene Xi. It's all at the discretion of the Chinese Communist Party, and it will all be put to the service of the Chinese Communist Party pursuant to the national security laws of China. I would simply close by saying we have, as a principle of the Trump national security strategy recently unveiled, fairness and reciprocity. And ladies and gentlemen, what you've been treated to in the course of this program, there is not a scintilla of reciprocity in terms of American access to China, ownership of land in China, ownership of land in proximity to sensitive facilities in China, or freedom of movement, especially for any of our intelligence assets. That is a disconnect that is, on the face of it, unfair. And more to the point, it is potentially fatal to this republic. And it simply behooves every single one of us who has been treated to this important reporting by the Daily Caller News Foundation, by LJ Eads and his work, by the analysis and commentaries of our other speakers, George Racely, Jim Fennell, Sam Faddis, Grant Newsham, and of course, not least Representative Keith Self, that we take to heart these warnings, that we not ignore them, we not slough them off, we not think, oh, somebody else will take care of that. We need to take responsibility for it. And I will close with this final thought. As I said, I am preoccupied with this army of Chinese soldiers now inside the United States. I've heard not a word from any official in the United States government, in the executive branch at least, since President Trump came to office, in all of the talk about immigration, what happened under the Biden open border policy, who came in, how many people came in, what they are up to, the fraud, the bilking of our systems in other ways and the like. Not a word about Chinese soldiers. And that suggests that the United States government is not attending to this problem either, which I think is, again, a danger of the first magnitude. And would simply close with this idea, as I have in previous programs. The American people, in the absence of a massive counterintelligence capability, with trained personnel, with a mandate for action, operating at large in our country, and contending with what will inevitably be a still larger Chinese communist presence here, it is absolutely imperative that the American people be enlisted as crowdsourcers for the kind of situational awareness we must have about these threats inside our country. The old line, see something, say something, presumes that people will know what to look for and will recognize something that needs to be reported to the appropriate authorities, of course, when it's seen. This, in other words, going back to something Sam Faddis alluded to, requires a wholesale change in how we are conducting ourselves in this fraught moment. And I think I can speak for the various folks from whom you've heard in this program and from the Committee on the Present Danger of China more broadly. We are determined to try to get that kind of course correction undertaken as a matter of the utmost urgency, because truly our lives and our country depend upon it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope, as always, that you will take this briefing and widely disseminate it among your circles of influence, and most especially with those who represent you, have the responsibility as well as the authority to try to act on our recommendations. God bless you all. God bless America. Over and out.